So this morning we're going to be answering or attempting to answer this question: what's fasting all about? I know it's an all-age service, and so we're not going to be going into as much depth as I might normally do, which is why you all have one of these, hopefully, to take away with you. And so if you want to, so some of the stuff I'm going to skim over, some of this is for you to take away and go and reflect on if you are interested afterwards. So just so we know what we're talking about, can anyone tell me what we mean by fasting? What is fasting? So we've got giving something up, denying yourself. More specifically, when we come to thinking it in terms of what the Bible was talking about, not eating and not drinking. And so fasting in the Bible is often linked to having a specific period of time where you don't eat or drink. And we are also going to be thinking about other things and other ways that we can deny ourselves as well. Some statistics for you, and the summary of this slide is that, for those of you that are squinting, is that if you are a white Western Christian, then it is probably highly likely that fasting hardly features on your radar of regular spiritual disciplines. So, that's the summary of that sheet. So, can anyone tell me what our vision is? Well done, Fiona. Fiona has clocked that every single slide that appears behind me or the other preachers every single week has our vision at the bottom. We are seeking to be an authentic community of disciples becoming like Jesus. And it goes on, but that's the bit I want to think about immediately at this point, because part of what we're about is being disciples of Jesus. And if you look in the New Testament, a disciple is somebody who had a teacher and they wanted to spend as much time as possible with their teacher. They wanted to learn from their teacher. They wanted to become like their teacher. And so as disciples of Jesus, one of the things that we're all about is spending time with Jesus and becoming more like Jesus. I'm giving you lots of clues to the questions I'm asking today. Can anyone tell me who this is? It's not Liz McColgan, no. Does Minnie McColgan have a name? Eilish or something. Ailish McColgan, so Liz McColgan's daughter. She was in the London Marathon last week, and she was the top-ranked British finisher, as far as I could work out. So she came 8th in the women's race. And if you are a top athlete, like Ailish McColgan, then there are lots of things in your week that you will do, and there are other things in your week that you won't do because you want to be able to run faster. So can anyone think of anything that if you were a top runner and your goal in life was to run faster, some of the things that you might do or not do? Any examples? What was that? Okay, so there are probably certain things that you don't eat or drink, because if you were, so you probably don't go out for pizza on a Friday night, as an example. So there are certain things that you won't eat and you won't drink because you want to run faster. Anything else? Ice bath. So you probably will jump in an ice bath after you've had a hard training session, not because you like feeling cold or because it's a pleasant experience, but because you want to run faster. One more example. Train. So you might go to the gym on a daily basis and they might lift weight, and she's not lifting weights because she wants to get a super fit or she wants to change her body shape or become a bodybuilder. She's doing it because she wants to run faster. And so there are lots of things that she will do and things that she won't do because her goal in life is to run faster. And for 2,000 years of church history, Christians have been doing things called spiritual disciplines. Sometimes we call them spiritual practices. And we do these things because they help us to become the people that we want to be. They help us spend time with Jesus, and they help us become more like Jesus. And so they are things like reading the Bible, praying, meeting with other Christians, being generous. Those are things that we do, not because we want to know everything that there is to know about the Bible, or because we want to be seen as being a super spiritual person, but we do them in order to spend time with Jesus and to become more like Jesus. And for most of church history, fasting, we won't go into this now, but it's possible that Luther and the Reformation is kind of where this started to unravel a bit for us as Protestants. But for the majority of church history, fasting has been one of those spiritual disciplines that people have done in order to spend time with Jesus and to become more like Jesus. And when we look at fasting in the Bible, and this is going to be very, very quick because it's an all-age service, I'm going to rattle through these. Some of them are on your sheet. When we look at the Bible, we see that fasting is a regular spiritual discipline. If you were alive in Jesus' day, you would almost certainly have fasted. Certainly the Pharisees fasted twice a week. John's disciples fasted a couple of times a week. There's evidence that the early Christians fasted twice a week. But there's always a reason for fasting, and you can read about them on here on the blue box, and you can fill in the orange box down the right as you look up all the references to fasting in the Old and the New Testaments. Fasting was always for a fixed period of time, so maybe from sunset to sunrise to sunset, maybe for 24 hours, maybe for 3 days. There are some longer fasts in the Bible. We read about Moses, Elijah, and Jesus fasting for 40 days. That fast for 40 days from Jesus was probably just from food, not from drink. But most of the fasts are a lot shorter than that. Fasting in the Bible isn't a diet plan. So although, as I said, there's evidence that the early church fasted twice a week, they weren't doing the 5-2 intermittent fasting plan, where you eat normally for 5 days and fast for 2 days as a way to reduce your calorie intake and therefore lose weight. It's not. There is always a spiritual reason why you are fasting, a purpose. The not eating was always replaced by something. So you wouldn't eat, but you would spend that time typically praying. Fasting and prayer, often particularly in the book of Acts, when you read them, those two things go together. Fasting helps us with self-control. Self-control is part of the fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22 and 23. And we're going to be thinking a little bit later on about how we live in a very consumer-driven society where you kind of have what you want. And fasting, so limiting yourself, denying yourself, trains your body and gives you self-control. And we're not trying to twist God's arm. So often when the early church were seeking wisdom, they would pray and fast. But they weren't trying to twist God's arm. And that reference from Jeremiah there is where God says to the people in the Old Testament, you're great at fasting, you make all the offerings, you expect me to listen to you when you pray, but in your hearts you're a million miles from me. You're oppressing the poor, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing the other. So they fasted and they made their offerings, and they expected God to do what they wanted, and yet God was saying, your hearts are in the wrong place. So fasting isn't about twisting God's arm. Right. And we're going to be following up on some of that later on in our service. So that's conscious of a very quick overview. That's the background, and we'll think about some specifics later on in our service. But we're good first. Right. So I'd just like to spend about the next 10 minutes for us to think together about how we might respond to what we've been very briefly introduced to this morning in terms of this thought about fasting. And as I say, looking at the statistics would suggest that for most white Western Christians, then fasting is something that we don't regularly already engage with as a spiritual discipline. So, we have a Slido. It's not a Slido quiz as such, having learned from last month's disastrous attempt where everything went wrong. So, if you've got a mobile phone, a smartphone, and you can get on the internet on it, don't worry if not. But if you go to slido.com, and if you're online watching live right now, you can also do this as well and join in. And then put in the number 1668198. And when you do that, you don't need to put your name in today. So everything that you do on Slido this morning will be anonymous. So that will hopefully, where's it gone? Slido. Right, so 1668198. Right, and so when you go there, you will see that you've got, first of all, I'd like you to, at the top you've got Q&A and polls. I'd like you to start with polls. And it says, is fasting something I have done before? And then you've got three options. Yes, but not very often. So by that I'm thinking like maybe at Lent you might give up chocolate. Or maybe 3 years ago you fasted but you haven't done anything since. So that's the yes, but not very often. Is fasting something I have done before? Yes, is yes, or no. And just to get some idea of where we are in terms of a church. And that's going to stay open for the next 10 minutes. So you don't have to do that right now. You can come back to that in a minute. Under the Q&A tab, which is the other one along the top next to polls, for the next 10 minutes, I'll leave this open. And you can, if you've got any questions that come up through what you're discussing with the person next to you or you're thinking about on your sheet, you can put your questions in there and submit them. And then I'll get a list of questions, which I won't necessarily look at addressing now because we want to finish in the not too distant future. But at some point this week, depending on what the questions are, I'll work out how we respond to those. So the polls are currently showing that fasting for almost all of us is either something that we've done but not very often or something that we've never done before at all. So those statistics from earlier on would be proved right. And so any questions you want to ask them on the Q&A tab. So Slido is going to just stay there for the next 10 minutes for you to use. But the other thing I think it's important for us to think about as we think about this topic of fasting is to recognize that we live in a culture which is very commercially driven. If you think about companies are after lots of ways to get your data so that they can kind of push adverts at you and get you to buy more stuff. What do I need now? I need this one. So can anyone tell me, and the Slido number is staying in the bottom corner, so don't worry if you've not put that number in, it's still there. Can anyone tell me what logo this is? McDonald's, okay. Can anyone tell me this one? Snapchat. I had some older people say earlier, I know it's something to do with social media, but I'm not sure which one it was. This is Cadbury's. This is Pepsi. Okay, so you recognize the logos instantly, so they're obviously doing their job except for Snapchat, but that's an age thing. And all of these things, whether they are food or whether they are a social media app, they have got something in them, either an ingredient or a bit of code, which are designed, and they're deliberately, to make you want more. There will be some chemical in there or some bit of code or research that has been done so that when you have it, you want more. And so that when you are driving on the road and you see the golden M, there is something in your mind that says, ooh, I should stop here because last time I drove past, I went in and I got a large strawberry milkshake, and it gave me a really good dopamine hit in my head. And your endorphins or whatever are going off and saying, oh, let's stop again. And the same with things like Cadbury's and social media. Social media companies, they want you to keep on scrolling, because if you keep on scrolling, they can sell more adverts, which means that they get more money. And you suddenly find yourself in a situation where you need a whole load of things that you never knew even existed 5 minutes before. But now your life is deficient because you don't have X, Y, or Z. And so this morning, I do want us to think about fasting in terms of not eating and drinking. But I want us to recognize that there are also other ways that we can train our bodies. And for some of us, because of maybe we're young, or maybe because we're old, or maybe because we're on medication, or because of our health issue, it might not be sensible to be thinking about not eating or drinking. And so that might not be an option medically for us because of where we are in our life situation. But that doesn't mean that we can't think about other ways that we can deny ourselves and train our bodies, so that my actions and my behaviors become driven by my desire to spend time with Jesus and be more like Jesus than my actions and behaviors are driven by chemical reactions firing off in my brain because I suddenly need to eat chocolate or go to McDonald's. In 1 Corinthians 9, this is the verse that's in the boxing gloves on your sheet, and this is from the Living Bible translates. Paul says, I train my body to do what it should do, not what it wants to do. And I think in our consumer-driven culture, it can be very helpful to learn to train our bodies so that they do what they should do, not what they want to do. And if you can train your body and deny yourself that most basic of urges to eat and to drink, if you can train your body to deny yourself food and drink, then you can probably train your body to deny and almost anything else. There are some tips on here about how you might get started. There are some ideas for children. But what I want us to do for the next 5 minutes, and you can do this on your own, you can do it with people next to you. If you've got children, you might want to talk to them about it. You've got a knife, a fork, and a spoon. On the knife, and you can, if you want more time, you can take this away and think about it, because I think it's important to recognize we need to be doing what God wants us to do as an individual. How is God speaking to me about this? Not necessarily to kind of a quick knee-jerk reaction that we think is a good idea. But as we think about fasting, we need to be thinking about three things. In the knife, you're going to write something in there. What are you going to give up? So you need a plan. So it might be a something, or you might say, I'm going to not have lunch on Tuesday, as an example of something that you are. So what are you going to give up? The fork is going to be the when and the how long. As we said, in the Bible, fasting was always for a period of time. And so, how long? Is it going to be one meal? Is it going to be from morning to evening? Is it going to be the in-between meals? And same with, like I say, with exercise, don't start with trying to do a 40-day fast. That is not going to go well. So start really small and build up. And then the spoon is to be thinking about, well, yes, I'm taking something out, but the whole point of a spiritual fast is that you put something else in. And so maybe rather than cook and eat lunch on a Tuesday, which normally takes me half an hour, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to read my Bible and pray, to be thinking about that. I'm being waved at from the back. So you've got actual knives, forks, and spoons to write on, is that right? So at the back, if you are younger and you want to go and rather than write it on here, you want to go and think about it with Sue and write on an actual wooden knife, fork or spoon, you can go and do that. So you can either do that if you're an introvert, you can just think about that in your chair. If you want to talk to the person next to you, if you're an extrovert sat next to an introvert, I'll let you work out who gets... I expect the extrovert will talk and the introvert will just ignore them. That's the way it tends to work, I found from experience. Anyway, and don't forget, if you've got any questions, you can put them on the Q&A tab, and the other one is still open as well about fasting. So I'll give you about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to have a think about that, and then we will round up.